So today's activity, which is the next slide, you got it. Our goal with this training is just to increase familiarity with some of the more obscure practices like forest farming, build confidence for planners as they discuss and then implement these practices, and then talk more about I'm calling them programmatic challenges, but the hard hurdles of navigating linking practices, narrative scenarios, and all of those things, and then identify when these practices are right for a producer. So with all of that, we're starting off with Walker, who's going to be discussing more on forest farming. Hopefully he can give us some insight in how these are going in the Northeast and what the benefits are. And Susie, would you just introduce Walker and the work that he's done?
Sure. I'll start it and Walker then take over. But Walker's based out in Danby, Vermont, so the southwest corner in Vermont, and is one of the directors at Smokey House Center, which has been around for 50 years. But Walker, I feel, has really put Smokey House on the map for very innovative ways of both implementing research and doing trials on forest farming. So it's going to be great because he can tell us what it's all about, how it's done, and give examples of that. And then Walker is also part of the Northeast Forest Farming Coalition. So he really takes a regional perspective. And some of you may have had a chance, if you're from NRCS Vermont or Massachusetts, to have joined us when we ran a workshop on site at Smokey House Center, which is a very cool place of thousands of acres. So Walker really has his finger on the pulse for what forest farming can do to help keep our forests and really make them more vital and productive. Over to you, Walker, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me today. Apologies in advance. Something about the lead up to this workshop always gets me sick. Last time I had to cancel on you all with the stomach bug, and I've got some cold or something, so I might have to pause to blow my nose a little bit. But excited to be here with you all today. Thanks for the introduction, Susie. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking to you all about forest farming today. And as Susie mentioned, I'm the program director at the Smokey House Center in Danby, Vermont. So we're really a land-based nonprofit. We manage this 5,000 acre property. And I'm really kind of in the last 2 years moving in the direction of kind of like an applied collaborative research center where we're really focused on trialing agroforestry and agriculture and forestry practices kind of in the context of climate change and how to build resiliency and adapt to what's headed our way. And then, yeah, you can go to the next slide, which is my other role in this work as being one of the co-directors of the Northeast Forest Farmers Coalition, which has been around since 2021. Is how it's a really a USDA Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education grant funded program that's housed at the Yale School of the Environment, and is really it's sort of building on and replicating the work done in the Appalachian region south of us through the Appalachian Beginning Forest Farmers Coalition, which has been around for much longer, like I think around 12 years at this point. So the NFFC was created really because we identified that forest farming is something that people are already doing in the Northeast, but really is a practice that people are interested in the Northeast. But there wasn't this sort of institutional infrastructure or support network that was there to help people adopt this practice and learn more about this practice. So that's really what we've moved into the role of doing, is sort of things like this, a lot of education, whether it's with technical service providers or beginning forest farmers, people interested in it. And then we do a lot of applied research. So we've got a lot of different research sites throughout the Northeast where we're doing research. And it's all really working towards promoting forest farming. Susie kind of alluded to this, not just as a sustainable, a form of sustainable economic development where landowners can be deriving a supplemental income from their forests and in turn keep their forests as forests. But also this is really a conservation practice for some of the plants that we're going to be talking about today. All right, so we're just going to jump right in. You can go to the next slide. And I'm going to try to keep this to like 20, 25 minutes. So I'm going to give you a very hard and fast overview of forest farming, and then really focus on giving you some real world examples in the region of people who are already doing this, because I think that's usually the most helpful thing. Then there's plenty of resources I can share with you as a follow-up after this. But let's start with the common definition of forest farming. So the National Agroforestry Center defines forest farming as the cultivation of high-value specialty crops under the protection of a forest canopy that has been modified to provide correct shade levels. So forest farming differs from other agroforestry practices because we're really talking about bringing production into the forest and growing things in the understory and on the forest floor of our native forests here in the Northeast. I'm not going to read the second definition, but really the reason I like to highlight it is, again, because it lists these other co-benefits besides, you know, supplemental income source, which is, you'll see later, like there's many, many reasons why people are interested in this practice in the region. So you can go to the next slide. Another definition at the core of this practice is non-timber forest product, or NTFP, which is really any biological product coming from the forest that is not a wood product itself. There's quite a diversity of these, you know, mushrooms, whether they're wild or cultivated, different fruits and nut crops. Syrups are a huge one in the Northeast, obviously. And then some of these botanicals that we'll really be getting into today. So you can see some of those examples here. And this is kind of a helpful slide to start to visualize what one of these systems might look like. Because when we're talking about forest farming, we're rarely just talking about one product coming out of that system. We really explain them as these multi-strata polyculture systems. That's a term you'll hear a lot. And what we mean by that is there's different strata within this forest system, and oftentimes you'll have products coming out of each one of those. So if you visualize this, you know, on the left there, we've got black walnuts, and then you've got sugar maple trees that are being tapped for syrup. So that could be your canopy level. You could swap out the walnuts with a lot of different nut crops. You know, yellow bud hickory is a big one these days. In our region, people are trying to get a cooking oil economy going off of yellow bud hickory. So those are your canopy crops. In the sub canopy, you might have something like pawpaws or another fruit crop where you're collecting fruit from there. And then with those sugar maples that you're collecting your syrup from, maybe you're doing some timber stand improvement in that stand, removing some of the smaller diameter wood to release the remaining trees, your crop trees, and let them grow better. And with that wood, you might be then inoculating it with, you know, shiitakes or another log-grown mushroom variety and growing those in the system as well. And then below all of that on the forest floor, you might be growing a forest botanical or managing a forest botanical species like ramps. So you can go to the next slide, because that's what the NFFC focuses on primarily, is what we call forest botanicals, which are these subset of non-timber forest products. You can see the 6 species that we really focus on here. And the reason we focus on these is because all of these species here have existing or developing markets around them. You know, they're highly valued by people. So in the case of ramps, you see there, that's the main edible one that, you know, people really value ramps as an edible crop. The rest of these are valued medicinally, and there are really global markets for these plant materials. So because of that, there's this demand for these plant materials. And because all of these are native plants that naturally occur in our forests, a lot of that demand has, for the last, you know, 100, 200 years, been met by wild harvesting, right? So people are harvesting from these wild populations. So that's created these circumstances where all of these species are considered at risk in many places along the eastern seaboard. And these are all, you know, perennial, long-lived species that grow on the forest floor. So you can see all of them have this vegetative stalk that dies back every year, but what we call the rhizome, the root system, that's going to persist year after year after year and store you know, energy. So these are long-lived species, and they haven't really evolved over time to react very well to large-scale disturbance, whether it's, you know, over-harvesting or land conversion, which we've really seen. You know, the majority of our forests in the Northeast have been cut down at one time or another. So what that's resulted in is really widespread reduction in these species' native range. So again, these species offer an opportunity for landowners to diversify their income stream. You know, it's a passive income, which is interesting and appealing to a lot of people. But again, this is not just an economic strategy. This is really a conservation strategy. So you can go to the next slide, which this term has been coined around this practice of forest farming, which is conservation through cultivation, whereby really the goal of developing this industry, this forest farming industry, is that we can empower people forest landowners to be sustainably growing these plants in their forests and shifting that supply chain to be less dependent on wild harvested populations of plants and more on these sustainably cultivated populations of plants. So it's a really cool, like, one way we describe it is it's sort of like humans are becoming these dispersal mechanisms for these historically over-harvested plants. Okay, so that's sort of the like philosophical undertone. Great timing, I didn't even have to tell you to switch. So this is just getting at, I've already said this a few times, I'm not going to read through all these, but this is straight out of our intake survey for the NFFC. So this is just a number of the reasons why people are coming to this practice. So you can see there are some things like passive income, maximizing income from land, but then there's like so many other reasons why people are interested in this practice. Okay, next slide. So the kind of first step, if you're working with someone who's interested in this, is to see if they have the right site, because all of those species that I just mentioned are kind of picky about the sites that they grow in. We kind of describe their ideal sites as these rich cove forests, you know, so they like really rich soils, especially calcium-rich soils, moist, well-drained soils. They're not going to like your really dry south-facing slopes. So this is a process called site selection. So once your landowner knows what species they're interested in, whether it's ginseng or ramps, or golden seal or black cohosh or bloodroot or Solomon seal, you want to go out and have them do their homework to make sure they have the right site, because you can buy a bunch of these seeds or roots and plant them, and it might not be the right site, and it might be a total waste of money, you know? So this process, I'm not going to go into detail on it. We have a lot of resources around this site selection process. But basically, it provides a framework for you to look at the different site factors like slope, aspect, drainage, shade levels, forest age, soil type. And then the big one is indicator species. So what species are already growing on that site, and what can they tell you about how some of these forest botanical species will grow there? So I'll talk about that a little bit more. You can go to the next slide. Are you seeing, oh yeah, so this isn't gonna, this changes a little bit. You're supposed to see these one at a time. So imagine we're starting on the left. Don't pay attention to anything else you're seeing. But when we're talking about producing or growing these crops, there's these different strategies or production systems, and they fall along this range of intensiveness. Where if you start on the left there, you see we're talking about wild stewarding. So in that example, we've got a patch of ramps that, you know, wild onions, that are already growing. Oh, thank you. Already existing on that site, right? Humans didn't plant them there. So that would be wild stewarding, because you're working with an existing plant population. So you could come in there and start harvesting ramps from that site for sale or for whatever use. But wild stewarding would be you're also managing that population so that removing whatever you're removing from it isn't actually going to inhibit the growth of that population. So you might also be coming in and collecting seeds in the fall or the late summer and stratifying those seeds yourself and then planting them back out. Or you might be digging up mature ramps that are going to be outcompeted by younger ramps in really dense areas and planting them out in less dense areas to spread that population. So it's kind of this, it's low intensive because you're not establishing a new population. It's pretty light touch, but you are interacting and being intentional with stewarding this population to succeed into the future. So a step up from there is what we call wild simulated production. This is a little bit more intensive because you're not working with an existing population. So you can see in this picture, we're establishing just a small test plot of ginseng. So there's no existing plants in this area, so we're going to establish a new population, either through planting seeds or through planting rootlets. But it's called wild simulated because once you've done that, you're pretty hands off. So you're really trying to simulate how those plants would change over time in a natural setting without humans, right? So again, it's very light touch. Excuse me. You might be altering the shade a little bit to help them grow better. You might be tending or weeding the populations a little bit, but really it's not very intensive. So next up is really getting more close to sort of our idea of conventional agriculture, except we're still in a forested setting. So this is called woods grown cultivation. So you can see there, this is a patch of ginseng that someone has in their woods. And I think I will just say, first of all, like this is very rare. Woods grown cultivation is not very common really anywhere in the United States. And there are reasons for that that I'll explain. So we promote really wild stewarding or wild simulated production models for the vast majority of people. There are a few people where this situation actually does make sense. So woods grown is more intensive. You might actually be tilling your soil and putting raised beds in your woods, you know. This you can see is really a monoculture of ginseng in someone's woods. They have raised beds here. They've really packed in the density. And you know, the benefit of that is that you're probably increasing production in that system, right? You're going to be able to, these are multi-year crops. You're probably not harvesting ginseng before 5, 7, 10 years. So this is a way that you can probably remove that, that harvest window and increase production a little bit. But you're also much more, you know, higher inputs, so more labor, more establishment costs, more active management, which if you think about this, the people who generally are interested in forest farming don't have that much time in the world. It's not their primary means of income. So that more passive approach of wild stewarding or wild simulated is usually more appealing to them. The other thing that this does is these native plants have evolved in really diverse forest dynamics. So when you remove that diversity, you're opening them up to risk. So for example, ginseng is very susceptible to fungicide. So if you remove that diversity and really pack in this density, there's a chance that, you know, you wait 5 years, 7 years, and you're ready to harvest your ginseng, and a fungal pathogen is going to come through and wipe out everything. So it's much riskier, this woods grown approach. So very few people are doing this in the United States. There are a few instances where it might be appropriate, especially if you have something like a degraded site, like a really degraded site with a lot of invasives. This might actually be on a small scale an appropriate situation. So the last one I'm not even really going to talk about because it's not even agroforestry, but just so you know, these plant materials are being harvested in what's called field cultivated settings under shade cloth. This is very much a form of conventional agriculture, super high input, you know, pesticide, fungicide, lots of tillage, shorter rotations, but we're really not focused on field cultivation. So you can kind of see this range of intensiveness with the increase in potential production, increase in cost, but also increase in risk. So we really focus on wild stewarding and wild simulated production. Okay, so now we're going to get into some examples. I'm going to really focus on 2, and then I'll just highlight a few others that you can kind of read about on your own. So for wild stewarding, sorry, I'm going to take a pause. For wild stewarding, a great example of an operation is Delaware Valley Ramps. It's owned by Steve Schwartz, who's on the Delaware River. So the way I'm going to describe this is kind of give you the site overview, the operational overview, and then the management. So for Steve, he's on a 20-acre hardwood floodplain forest on the Delaware River. Super rich soils because of, you know, thousands of years of deposits from the river. It's really rich soils, rock-free, very loamy soils, very high in calcium. The indicator species he has on his site are really everything you're looking for. So he's got sugar maple, white ash, yellow birch, black cherry, all indicators of these rich floodplain forests. In the understory, he's got trillium, mayapple, jack in the pulpit. And then, as you can see in this picture, he had really healthy populations of ramps already. So that helps a lot if you're interested in getting into ramps as an income stream. So you can go to the next slide. So Steve's had a really interesting kind of evolution of his business over time. You know, he started with small scale after he purchased the property. And this is kind of a theme that you'll hear over and over with really the vast majority of people forest farming. Very diversified operations. Almost no one is like, this is their full-time income, full-time job and total income, you know? So for Steve, he started with small scale maple syrup, doing some foraging on the property like fiddleheads, and was picking ramps that he was then bringing down to New York City and selling to a lot of restaurants in the city in Brooklyn. And he was having success with this. This started in 2007. So he kind of expanded. He started doing a CSA to people in the city for ramps. He started going direct to distributors. And this was really successful in all word of mouth until COVID hit. And when COVID hit, you know, all the restaurants shut down. And this all dried up at once for him. And then coming out of COVID, it was just a lot harder to get this going again because restaurants had fallen on harder times, harder to get back in with the distributors. So he was forced to kind of pivot. So he started experimenting with this U-pick ramp operation starting in 2022, where he would, you know, invite people to come to the property and pick ramps themselves. So the way he describes this is it's sort of like, you know, they're paying to pick the ramps, but they're paying for the experience. It's almost like going to an apple orchard in New England in the fall, you know, that people really enjoy going there and doing this thing. So what this looks like for him is a 4-week season where he invites 10 people per 2.5 hour slot, 3 days a week. And the max that they can pick is around 3 pounds of ramps. He says very few people actually pick the 3 pounds. I did the math earlier. I'm going to embarrass myself trying to do it again. But I think it comes out to like 250, 300 pounds of ramps per year at a maximum. He's doing some other harvesting still for direct sale, but that's the majority of what's going on the property. He trains everyone who comes there. That's kind of part of the experience. He trains them in best harvesting practices, which is his means of kind of controlling what's going on. And the really cool thing is he says the majority of people now who come here to do this are not taking those ramps home to eat. They're actually taking them to plant them back in his woods. So he's kind of indirectly become sort of like a ramp propagation hub in his region, which is pretty cool. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So yeah, how is he managing this site? Well, there's sort of the tree component and then the ramp component. With the trees, it's a bit of a misconception that because these forest botanical species have evolved on the forest floor in these low light settings that they like as much shade as possible. That's actually not true. Recent research has shown they grow better with a little bit more light. Say, you know, taking the canopy from 90% shade down to maybe 70% shade. So Steve worked with his local forester to come up with a plan to do this. And he did a thinning and opened up some of the canopy in 2019. And he said that the ramps are growing better on that site since he's done that. It does come with some trade-offs. There's a little bit more competition, including some invasives like knotweed, which is a common floodplain invasive that he's now needing to manage more. But he says it's been worth it. And then he's also managing the ramp populations actively, you know, in this wild stewarding model. So he kind of describes it as facilitating ramp succession. So what that looks like is, as I've mentioned, the way ramps grow over time is they divide by bulbs. So when a bulb gets quite large, it'll divide into 2 bulbs. And then also they reproduce through seeds. But the seeds don't really have any way to disperse. So they just fall to the base of that plant and sprout. So what you get is these really dense clumps kind of growing out radially. And the oldest, most mature plant, the kind of parent plant, will eventually get crowded out by the young. So Steve trains people who come to harvest the ramps through the U-pick program to take those largest ramps in the center home with them and leave the younger ones to kind of replace them. And then he does the same thing. He'll take those large ramps out and plant them out in new places in the forest. And he says after 17 years of doing this, he's actually seen his ramp population spread. And he's not just saying this, he's actually working with some researchers to track this. So that's pretty amazing. Next slide, please. Okay, so switching over to the wild simulated sort of modality of production. A great example of this is Anna Plattner and Justin Wexler of Wild Hudson Valley. So they're down in the Hudson Valley. This is a picture of them. I couldn't get the thing to not move off Anna's face, so you can kind of see Anna. They're amazing. They do a lot of education in this realm as well. So they manage 250 acres of wild simulated ginseng production in the Hudson Valley and the Catskills. They own 90 acres of that. They lease about 160 acres through the American Ginseng Farm. I'm not really going to talk about that lease structure today. It's kind of complicated and interesting. But as far as their site conditions and what they're looking for, they've kind of worked with a lot of people to really come up with kind of a strict guidelines for the sites that they're growing. very calcium dependent. So they don't plant ginseng in an area that has less than 2,000 pounds an acre of calcium, pH around 5.5. So they're largely working in similar kind of rich hardwood floodplain forests. The indicator species are similar, you know, sugar maple, white ash, basswood. If there's like any tree species that indicates a calcium rich site good for forest farming, it's basswood. Understory, you know, they would say maidenhair fern is the best ginseng understory species. If you have maidenhair fern, that's very likely going to be a good place to grow some ginseng. They're also looking for older forests that, you know, were not converted into pasture in the last 100 years. And then the other big thing they say is stay away from soils that have a lot of earthworms, because that can really devastate these forest botanical populations. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so what's their operation actually look like? Again, very diversified. They do, you know, their primary focus is wild simulated ginseng. They are the largest wild simulated ginseng farm in the country. But that's a pretty slow, you know, a slow developing income stream. So they do other things. They do a lot of log grown mushrooms, a lot of shiitakes. They grow some golden seal as well, which is another forest botanical. And then they do these wild harvest CSA boxes where they forage. So this would be wild stewarding. They forage things from all over their property, and then have a CSA program for local folks in the Hudson Valley. And they started planting ginseng in 2013. And, you know, they have this 90-acre site, but it's not like it's 90 acres of ginseng, right? They are within that 90 acres targeting these micro sites with those site characteristics. And they won't plant more than maybe an acre to 2.5 acres at the max at a time. And yeah, I think they're just about ready to start harvesting some of those first plantings that they did after 8 years. You know, ginseng is CITES regulated. So if you're harvesting for these wholesale markets, there's a lot of hoops that you have to jump through from the federal level, international level, state level. Everybody kind of has their different ginseng laws. So that's really important to figure out if you are going to get into this. But in the meantime, while they've been waiting, they've also started harvesting ginseng leaves and making value-added products out of that, which is kind of an interesting market. They also sell a lot of stratified ginseng seed to other forest farmers, so they're quite diversified. All right, next slide, please. So how are they managing the site? Similar to Steve, they have done thinnings to open up a little bit more light, and they've also been doing some research with folks at the Yale School of the Environment that has shown that this ginseng is growing better in these altered light conditions. The way that they go about planting the ginseng, which this is sort of a methodology you could apply to any of these forest botanicals, you're looking for around 4 seeds per square foot, which comes out to about 24 pounds of seed per acre. And the way that they do this is they, in the fall, once everything's died back, they take a leaf blower and they actually walk, you know, through their woods and in these kind of strips along the hillside. They'll blow the leaves back, throw the ginseng seed out, almost like you're feeding chickens, you know, and then you stomp on it, blow the leaves back over, and that's basically it. So it's quite a streamlined process. It's a lot of work right away, but after that, you're really, you know, you're waiting for years. So, and the last kind of management thing to consider, less so with these other crops, but more with ginseng, is poaching. So the way that they've dealt with that is at the start of the legal harvest season for ginseng in September, on the first day, they go and they harvest all their ginseng tops because they're basically done photosynthesizing for the year. They take those tops and they process them into value-added products. And then if a poacher comes through, they can't see that there's any ginseng there. So it's a pretty good way to go about that. Okay, next slide. So I'm again not really going to talk about this that much, but just to show you that the woods grown operations do exist. I think this is like forest ecologist's nightmare. This is kind of, I think, why people get concerned about forest farming sometimes, is something like this, where this is sort of this monoculture of ginseng. So this is Larry Harding's operation, Harding Ginseng, down in Maryland. He is kind of a unicorn. Like nobody else is doing anything like this because most of the production like this is in a field grown setting, right? There aren't that many benefits to doing this in the forest. And forest farming just inherently is complex and is hard to scale in a forest setting. So Larry really is, he's kind of singular in his approach to this, but his family's been doing it for generations. They sell all different ginseng products from value added to woods grown, which is a completely different market from the wild stuff. They distribute a lot of ginseng seed to other growers, but it's a very high input system. But yeah, like in the 4 years I've been doing this work, not a single person has come up to me and said they want to do what Larry's doing. So you can go to the next slide and just see a picture of the man, the myth, the legend. There he is with his famous ginseng. So yeah, those are the main examples. You can go to the next slide. I'll just highlight a few others that like these are folks we work with who are great educators, are always willing to share knowledge. So Ed and Carol Daniels, Shady Grove Botanicals, they're I want to say they're in Tennessee. I'm forgetting right now, but they're down in Appalachia. We've done a lot of like programs that kind of set experienced forest farmers in the South up with people in the North because there are not that many experienced forest farmers in the Northeast. They do great stuff with all those forest botanical species I mentioned and do a lot of cool value added products. Next slide. Yeah, Mayapple Farms is Rick Falumley owns Mayapple Farms in Ohio. He's a diversified vegetable farm, grows amazing garlic. And then he also does a lot of mushroom cultivation. So a lot of shiitakes and other specialty varieties. And then he's really started doing well with growing small quantities of these forest botanical species. He sells some as planting stock and he sells some directly to apothecaries and different herbalists. Okay, next slide. And then this is a really great operation to highlight. Warren Wilson College is down in Asheville, North Carolina. We partner with them quite a bit. And they have this great program where they're basically working with people in their region to source ecotypic seed. So seed from wild populations of these plants. And then they grow them out in this nursery setting as quickly as they can and distribute them out to forest farming, to forest farmers. So this is really an effort to get ecotypic seed into forest farmers' hands instead of most of the primary seed sources for, say, ginseng that you would be getting right now are not grown in the region that you'd be planting them in. So there's some concerns amongst forest ecologists. I know some folks at the NRCS have concerns about this, rightfully so. So this is a really great initiative down at Warren Wilson that we're actually trying to kind of get off the ground and mimic at Smokey House. And there's some other regional partners doing similar work. Okay, next slide. I think that's just about it. Yeah, just to say, in addition to if you are working with someone interested in this, I think the big things to talk about right off the bat are the species they're interested in. Do they have the right site? Go through that site selection process, and then think about the markets. Like, what scale are they interested in? Which of those production models? But then also, who are they trying to sell this to? Are they the wholesale markets exist? Again, there's a lot of hoops that you got to jump through. There's some barriers for a small grower. They're not always accessible. So we usually recommend, like, if you're starting small, find your local herbalist, your local apothecary, your small business. A lot of food co-ops have in the bulk section, all of those species, they'll have the roots sort of as a medicinal in the bulk section. So that's just something, even though it takes, 5 years to get to the point where you might have something harvestable, it's good to start thinking about your market before you invest in this operation. Another market is this, we're doing a lot of work to start up nurseries because we have these planting stock shortages, especially ecotypic planting stock. So that's another route beginning forest farmers can go in, is more growing to sell plant materials to other forest farmers. Okay. And then just to end on the barriers, this is like all of these practices, it's complicated, and we're trying to get these things off the ground in as responsible a way as we possibly can. There's still a lack of technical, experience and expertise. Things like this are helpful, I think, and we're moving in the right direction. Again, I've already said the planting stock shortages and those questions of ecotypic plant material. And then there is uncertainty around markets, even though markets exist for these plants. There's some nuance to it, and I'm happy to go into that a little bit more if people have questions. So I think that's it. I might have gone, I think I probably went a little over the 20 minutes, but happy to answer any questions. And yeah, glad to talk with you all today. Thanks for having me.